after the true Selâhaddin went back to Damascus. And the narration mentioned that one wet day he went to visit the Hajis. And when he came back, it was cold, it's wet. He became ill. And every day his state got worse. And Al-Imad mentioned, I was with Selâhaddin when he was ill. He says, by Allah, every time Selâhaddin became more ill, it was as though his trust in the rahmah of Allah just increased. He said, the weaker his body got, the stronger his trust in Allah became. And even in that state, Selâhaddin couldn't go to the masjid anymore. But he insisted on praying salah with jama'ah. And they would bring an imam, they would help him up, and he would pray salah in jama'ah. On the 9th day, Selâhaddin became unconscious. And Shaykh Jafar mentions that I was reciting the Quran by his bed, and when I reached the verses, Wallahu la ilaha illahu, alimul ghaybi wa shahada. He is Allah and no Lord besides Him, the knower of the unseen. He says Selâhaddin had been unconscious for a while, and I heard a faint voice saying, Sahih, you have spoken the truth. And he mentioned, for 3 days I recited the Quran by the bed of Selâhaddin. And he said, on the final day when he passed away, I reached the verse, La ilaha illahu alayhi tawakkaltu. There is no God but Allah, and upon Him I trust. And I saw Selâhaddin's face become radiant, and he recited the Shahada, and he left this dunya. And Ibn Shaddad mentioned that this was the greatest calamity to befall the Muslims since the demise of the Khulafai Rashidun. Ibn Shaddad mentions that many times I had heard the saying that I wish I could die on this place. And I always thought that this was an exaggeration. But he said, I realized the reality of that statement when Selâhaddin passed away. He said, I wish I could have died on the place of Selâhaddin. And Abdul Latif, the famous physician, says that he was mourned like a prophet because everybody loved him. The good loved him, the bad loved him, the Muslims loved him, the non-Muslims loved him. Everybody loved Selâhaddin. And what did this king leave behind him? King of Egypt, king of Syria, Lebanon, Yemen. What did he leave behind him? He left 1 dinar and 47 dirhams, some armor and a horse. This is all he left behind him. They had to borrow money for his janazah. But I'll tell you what he left behind him. He left a legacy behind him. He left a legacy behind him. And this is why we are gathered here today. He passed away at the time of Fajr, and after Dhuhr they brought his body out. And the narrations mention that people screamed and cried as though the whole dunya had just become one place. And many people, when they saw his dead body, they couldn't believe it. They became unconscious. They didn't attend the janazah because they couldn't believe that Selâhaddin had passed away, the liberator of the Holy Lands. And how was Selâhaddin buried? They had to borrow money for his janazah. And Qadi Fadil gave a fatwa that Selâhaddin should be buried with his sword, so that on the day of judgment when he's resurrected, and one of the 7 people who is under the shade of Allah is Imamun Adilun, a just ruler. When he's under the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is leaning upon his sword. So everybody sees that this is the liberator of the Holy Lands. And on his tomb they wrote, because this was the man who liberated, this was the man who flung open the gates of fortresses and castles of the Christians, one after the other. And on his tomb they wrote, Oh Allah, as his final victory, open for him the gates of Jannah. Open for him the gates of Jannah.